Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to look at my Alela deck. The theme of this is not so much enchantments, but more of fairies and artifacts. Reason for that, of course, we look at Alela here. Of course, having Flying, Death Touch, and Lifelink being amazing. We have other creatures you control with Flying get +1/+0. Every creature in the deck has Flying, and if not, we have a creature that can give everything Flying. But whenever you cast an artifact or enchantment, you get a 1/1 blue fairy token. Again, not so heavy on the enchantments. There are some, but not nearly as much as our artifacts. So let's go ahead and jump into looking at all of our creatures. First, we have Fairy Godmother. Now, I think it's awesome that in Throne of Eldraine they kind of went on some play on words, of course, instead her being Fairy Godmother instead of Fairy Godmother. Humorous, if you ask me. But I also love how they did these awesome showcase borders. I think these are absolutely gorgeous. So every card in here that I could get in the showcase border, I have, with the exception of one, and we'll get to that one in a minute. But we have Fairy Godmother here, very simple. Then we have Cloud Sprite. We have the Eye Collector. Then we have Fairy Seer. Of course, 1/1 for 1 is pretty simple. But on top of having Flying, because it's a fairy, I do like how you get the Scry with this one. Then we have Una's Gate Warden. Then we have Hypnotic Sprite. It's like our only counter in the whole deck. Fae of Wishes. Now this one's fun because of the granted sorcery on the adventure side. You can choose a non-creature card you own from outside of the game, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Of course, when you're playing with your friends, it doesn't matter. You just pull a card out of, binder, collection box, or, even another deck. But from what I've been told and what I've read online, if you're at a quote-unquote sanctioned event playing Commander, it has to be in a sideboard. Then one of our few non-fairy creatures, Baleful Strix, Flying and Death Touch, and gives you a card when it comes into play. We have Animating Fairy, which the sorcery side, you can actually turn one of your artifacts into a 4/4 creature, so that's helpful. We have Pester Mite, Wasp Lancer. Of course, digging into some of the old fairies, you have to, classic ones. Then we have Sprite Noble. This one gives your other creatures with Flying +0/+1, so that kind of balances out with Alela, but you can also tap it to give those creatures +1/+0 as well. Then we have the Scion of Una. This one's a good powerhouse. Gives all your other fairies +1/+1, and it gives all of your other fairies Shroud. Now, Shroud and Hexproof can be confusing for some people. For the longest time, I always got them backwards. Really, the biggest downside in this deck is that I think we have 3 equipment spells, so you can't use those when this is out, but not that big of a deal. Then we have the Tome Raider. Sounds an awful lot like Tomb Raider, doesn't it? Comes in the battlefield, draw a card. And then Brazen Borrower, the only one I don't have in Showcase. It is really expensive, so when I pulled this out of a pack, I thought, you know what? This'll do. We'll just do with this until I can come across one. Petty Theft, you return non-land permanent to your opponent's hand. Not super critical. In certain situations it can be, but it is rather irritating for them. And of course, it has Flying, and it can only block creatures with Flying. Not that big of a deal. One of our other non-fairies, the Empyrean Eagle. Other creatures you control with Flying get +1/+1. That's the whole reason it's in here. And then we have the Angel of Vitality. If you would gain life, you gain that much +1, and then as long as your life is at 25 or more, it has +2/+2. So if you draw this, first hand or beginning of the game, you're going to get a 4/4 for 3, which personally I think is pretty awesome. The life gain, there's a very small life gain set in this deck. We'll get to that in a minute, though. Then we have Glenalindra Liege. Other blue creatures get +1/+1, and other black creatures get +1/+1. Almost every fairy in here is at least black and or blue. So this is absolutely amazing to have in here. Then we have Sower of Temptation, Faerie Harbinger, which this is awesome because it lets you search for any fairy card. We do have a fairy enchantment. You might can guess what that is already. We have Arcanist Owl. This just kind of goes in because it's white-blue, and it's an artifact, and it's got flying. Its other effect is pretty helpful, but that's not the main reason I put it in here. Then we have Faerie Formation. Basically, this is just one of our heavy hitters. I mean, it's a 5/4 with flying, and if we have some extra mana, we can create tokens and draw a card. Then, one of the classic fairies. I wanted to build a deck around her, which I still might do, but for right now, she's going to just sit in on this one. Una, Queen of the Fae. I would like to get the Secret Lair version of her. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. But you can basically pay into her and remove however many cards from your opponent's library from the game. And if you pick the right colors, you get 1/1 blue and black Fairy Rogue tokens. Then we have Shimmer Dragon, again, another non-fairy, just a heavy hitter with flying. And then we have our Archetype of Imagination. Again, everything in the deck already has flying, but in case something happens where it doesn't, this can give flying back. But the real kicker is it takes flying away from everybody else, so they won't be able to block you. And it is an enchantment, so that helps out. And then our last creature, we have Sephara, Sky's Blade. Again, a non-fairy, but at 7/7 with flying and lifelink, and then it also gives our creatures that have flying, it gives them indestructible, so I'd say that's a pretty awesome inclusion as well. Alright, that's it for our creatures. Now we're going to take a look at our other spells, our instants, our enchantments, and our sorceries. There are very few instants and sorceries, and then we have a good little bit of enchantments to go along with Alela. So first off, we'll start with our instants. We have Mortify, classic blue-black instant to destroy any creature, any enchantment. Then we have Opt, a very awesome card. One, you get to scry, do you want it or not? Put it on top or on bottom, and then you draw a card anyway. So that's it for our enchantments. Instants. Just two. So for our sorceries, first one, we have Notorious Throng. This one's awesome because of the prowl cost. I have used this before, and you get to use that if you've dealt combat damage to a player with a rogue. So very few actual rogues in here. We have a way to make rogue tokens, so that would be the way we could do that. But basically, you get to take an extra turn if you pay the prowl cost. Then we have Stolen by the Fae. I was able to get the extended art of this one. We return a creature with converted mana cost X to its owner's hand, and then you make that many blue fairy tokens. Then next we have Unexplained Vision. This is just for draw. And then after we draw, if we use at least 3 blue mana, we get to scry, so we see what's coming up next. And we have our only split card of the deck. We have Revival, Revenge. Honestly, the Revival is not that big of a deal to me. It's the Revenge side that I like. You double your life total. So you get this, towards the beginning. I mean, it is 6 to cast it, so it's not like you can play it at the very, very beginning of the game. But you get this pretty early. You can get up to 80 life, no problem. Now for our enchantments. Of course, you can't have a fairy deck without Bitter Blossom. Definitely one of the pricier cards. When I was looking at getting this card, to me it made more sense just to go ahead and buy the Secret Lair off the secondary market, because it wasn't just a few dollars more, plus it came with the tokens, which if you have looked at the price of the tokens, they're actually kind of expensive. Anywhere from $2.50, I think I've even seen them up to $5 each, and that's just the tokens. So we do have the Bitter Blossom, which will give us our tokens at the beginning of every turn. You lose a life, but that's where our life gain comes in to balance that out. And then you make a 1/1 black fairy rogue. So there's one of our ways to make rogues for our Notorious Throng spell. So again, got to have this with any of your fairy decks. Then we have Blind Obedience. Basically, just taps down your opponents. Whenever they play an artifact or a creature, it comes in tapped. And then, of course, you can use the Extort as well for some life gain. Good old Smothering Tithe. Pretty much in any white deck, you gotta have it. It's extra mana, and that 2 mana for your opponents to pay when they draw a card, it gets old for them real fast. Then we have another Archetype of Finality. Gives our creatures Death Touch. That's really the main reason it's in here, and then of course it's an enchantment, so it would count for Alela when we cast it. Then we have Octopus Umbra. Enchanted creature, has base power 8/8, and whenever it attacks, you can tap a creature with power 8 or less. And then of course the Totem Armor, which is amazing. Then we have Dictate of Heliod. Not really worried about the flash, but giving our creatures +2/+2. Then we have Mirror Maid, which can copy any artifact or enchantment on the battlefield, so that could be helpful. It could come in as another Mana Rock, or you could make it another Bitter Blossom, or whatever. And then we have Ethereal Absolution, giving our creatures +1/+1. Helpful, yes, but taking away power and toughness from our opponent's creatures is nice too. And then we can make spirits if we want to. Alright, now we're going to look at our artifacts. We have a good little bit of artifacts in here, but again, that goes along with Alela. Every time you cast an artifact or an enchantment with her, you make a 1/1 fairy token. So we do have quite a bit of those. I'd say it's about half and half. We have Mana Rocks, and then the rest is just helpful artifacts. I believe we have 3 equipment as well. So let's get started. We'll look at our Mana Rocks first. Gotta have Soul Ring. Every commander deck in the world, gotta have it. Right behind that, if you have a multicolored commander deck, gotta have your Arcane Signet. You talk about a good turn 1 play, is you get these 2 in hand with a land, and the only thing that can go better than that is if you have a good 1-drop to play after that. I take that back. What's better is if you have Mana Vault, which I do not have in this deck, but I do have that in another deck, which I have searched out with the split card, where you take a card from outside of the game. But you get into this, where you do your land, get your Soul Ring, get your Arcane Signet, drop your Mana Vault, and if you have maybe another artifact or something that costs 3, drop that out. Well, then look, our next couple of Mana Rocks, they're all 3 drops. You've got Mana Geode, comes in, we get to scry 1. And then we get into our colored ones. We have the lockets. So we have Dimir Locket for our blue and black, our Azorius Locket for our white and blue, and then our Orzhov Locket for our white and black. Each one of those, of course, you can put mana into it to draw cards. Then we have our talismans. We've got the Talisman of Dominance, Talisman of Hierarchy, and the Pristine Talisman. This one helps with our life gain. If you have this out with Bitter Blossom, it basically evens it out. If you have this out with Bitter Blossom and the Angel of Vitality, then you are ahead. You gain 2 life every turn. Now you might be wondering, where's the blue-white one? Well, that talisman is really expensive, and also it's a very tiny thing that bothers me. That one's actually never been reprinted from its original set, but in that one, the mana symbols down here are blacked out, and I'll try to get a picture of that up so you can see it. But it irritates my OCD. Like, I can't stand it. So that didn't get put in here. Plus, like I said, that one's a little bit on the pricier side. I think when I checked it, it was about $8. So it's just a little too much, considering, all the other Mana Rocks I have. So again, there's our Pristine Talisman. Gilded Lotus. I love Gilded Lotus because that can give us 3 of whatever color we need. So those are all of our Mana Rocks. Then we have our other our artifacts, 2 of which are enchantments. We have the Bident of Thassa. Really, the main thing to this for me is whenever one of my creatures deals damage, I get to draw a card. So that's nice. And again, it's an enchantment, so it counts for Alela. And of course, well, it's an artifact, so it also counts for Alela. Don't believe it triggers twice, though. Only once. Then we have the Spear of Heliod, giving our creatures +1/+1. And now this other effect, I do use this. Destroy target creature that dealt damage to you this turn. That can be very, very awesome. Then we have Bolas' Citadel. I like this in this deck because we have a lot of low-cost creatures and some low-cost artifacts. So we can just play them off the top of our deck by paying life. With your life gain, you can gain it back, no problem. And then down here at the bottom, when you sacrifice 10 permanents and each opponent loses 10 life, that, I wouldn't count on that. It would be like a dire situation, like if you've got a lot of Faerie tokens on the field, or even a lot of treasure tokens from Smothering Tithe. That could be helpful as well. The Cauldron of Eternity. It's a 12-drop, but costs 2 less for each creature in the graveyard. This one, not super... I think I'm going to take this one out. I'm not 100% sure yet. But whenever a creature dies, it goes... whenever a creature you control dies, it goes to the bottom of its owner's library. So you will eventually get back to your creatures, maybe. Just keeps them out of the graveyard. Then we have Fountain of Renewal. The only reason this is in here is life gain at the beginning of the upkeep, and it's only a 1-drop. And then our equipment. We've got Colossus Hammer. This one is awesome. Equipped creature gets +10/+10, but it loses flying. So that's not good, the losing the flying part. However, that's where our archetype of Imagination comes in, gives the flying back to it. You just have to play this first. Then we have Mace of the Valiant. Every time a creature enters the battlefield under my control, put a charge counter on it, and it gets +1/+1 for each charge counter. So this one can beef up your creatures a lot too. And then lastly, Ancestral Blade. This is really just a cheap equipment that gives us a token. I mean, it only gives +1/+1, but again, it's a cheap artifact and cheap to equip. So there's our artifacts. Alright, last thing is our lands. Of course, our main source of mana for any deck, but we want to make sure we have a very well-rounded base to cover our colors. So we'll start off with Command Tower. Again, a staple in any Commander deck that's multicolored. I mean, yes, you could put it in a monocolored deck too, but it kind of defeats the purpose, I think. Also able to get the awesome art from the Brawl decks, which I absolutely love this art. Then we have Arcane Sanctum. It's our tri-land for the Esper colors. Comes in the battlefield tap, but that's, that's any tri-land. Then we have our shock lands. We have Watery Grave, Hallowed Fountain, or Hallowed Fountain, however you want to say it. Then we have Godless Shrine for our Orzhov colors. So those are our shock lands. Then we have, I think these are referred to as check lands, if I remember correctly. They come in tapped unless you control one of the basic land types, which, if you refer back to our shock lands, look, they have the basic land types. They're just not actual basic lands. So we have Drowned Catacomb, Glacial Fortress, and Isolated Chapel. Those are 3 check lands. Then we have the temples. They each come in tapped, but you get to scry one. Yes, coming in tapped is a little bit of a pain, but when they've got a perk like this, I don't see it as being that big of a deal. So again, Temple of Deceit, Temple of Enlightenment, and then Temple of Silence. Then we have our tap lands that gain us life. We have Dismal Backwater, Tranquil Cove, and Scoured Barrens. Now, those were all of our land cycles that have one of each. Or, excuse me, they have all of the color combinations. Now we're getting into our ones that only have 2 of them. So first we have Sunken Hollow. This is from Battle for Zendikar. It comes in tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands. So we just have to have 2 or more basics. Also counts as an island or a swamp, just not a basic one. And then to go along with that, we have Prairie Stream. We just don't have a black and white colored one. Then we have our guild gates. These just come in tapped. We have the Dimir Guild Gate, the Azorius, and the Orzhov. Then we have River of Tears. It always adds blue unless you play the land that turn and then add black instead. And then we have Nimbus Maze. I think this one's my favorite. I love the artwork, first of all. It's just gorgeous. Taps for colorless, normally. You can tap for white if you have an island, and then you tap for blue if you control planes. So, depending on where you're at when you play this, it's basically either an island or a plains if you've already got the other ones. And then we have the dual lands from Shadows over Innistrad. Choked Estuary. You just reveal an island or a swamp from your hand, and it comes in untapped. If not, it comes in tapped. And then Port Town, same thing except plains or swamp. Then we have the tap lands, the tap cycle lands from Amonkhet. We have Fetid Pools. Again, also counts as an island or a swamp. And then we have Irrigated Farmland. If you've got these, later in the game, you can just cycle them to draw a card. And then we have our basics. I went for the Theros Beyond Death full arts. I think these are gorgeous. We have 5 of each. We've got our plains, our islands, and then our swamps. So that's it for our lands.